Like the others, I deeply appreciate this opportunity. I wish I could start with a smiley face. I guess there is one out there. That's not what we expected. Okay, so what's next? The crystal ball associated with soil erosion and water runoff is really pretty clear. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the challenges that we've experienced, while they're pretty major, are going to get worse. Water is incredibly powerful, especially when it moves. 40 inches of rain falling on 100 acres has the impact energy equivalent to 4 tons, not pounds, tons of TNT. Farmers are managing that impact energy. It's that impact energy that initiates the soil erosion process. Slides I'm going to show indicating quantification or our best quantification estimates of soil erosion. We're not pointing blame. We're not identifying blame. We're not pointing fingers. It's a tremendous challenge to manage the power that we have in today's falling rain. We have to work together if we're going to have a chance to solve. Okay, so when someone tells you that your erosion rate is 5 tons per acre per year, what does that mean? What happens to that soil? Well, in reality, if you're looking at the USDA approach, the NRI, or what we're going to use in the Daily Erosion Project, the Water Erosion Prediction Project, WEP, we're simply estimating the quantity of soil that moves down that hill slope past the head of the yellow arrow. Everything else is ignored. The techniques that we're using now address sheet and rill erosion. Ephemeral gully erosion is ignored, and past that arrow, that yellow arrowhead is where we think flow concentration is sufficient that we're dealing with concentrated flow and ephemeral processes. They're not included in the numbers that you'll see. So what do we do with the Daily Erosion Project? Because that's the basis of the rest of the talk. We use a process-based and event-based model, WEP, to make estimates across the landscape, across the large domain. We're making estimates daily of soil erosion rates covering all of Iowa, most of Minnesota, parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. To handle that volume, we have to get our inputs from remote sensing. We have remote sensing from different locations that give us an estimate of the information that's needed for every hill slope that we're making an estimate on. In Iowa, we're making independent soil erosion estimates on over 220,000 random hill slopes in the state. We collect that information through the day. At 12 o'clock, we push the go button, and by 6 a.m., we have an estimate of soil erosion that we post on the website across the entire domain. More details later if you want. So what's it telling us? Well, the first thing, if we're going to address soil erosion, there are 3 fingerprints, so to speak, that we must understand. One is where it's occurring, when it's occurring, and how much. If we're going to design conservation practices, we have to know that information. That will help inform the criteria we use for those designs. So what you see here are 4 different years in which we've estimated soil erosion, the total for each year. We've taken the daily numbers and added them so that we get the total value. The color ramps are on the side, the color indications. The darker the color, the greater the erosion rate. The maximum that we see on there is somewhere around 40 tons per acre in a given year that has moved past the head of that yellow arrow. Are all years the same? 2012 is in the lower right, 2008 in the upper left. Absolutely, they're not the same. So it tells me that temporally, we don't have a consistent threat associated with the soil erosion process. But some years, it's really bad, or at least not as good. If you take the time period 2008 through 2016, the Daily Erosion Project estimates annually across the state, the average is 5.1 tons per acre. That's on those hill slopes that we've moved past the head of that yellow arrow. The USDA approach using Russell, the Natural Resources Inventory, NRI, estimates that during this time period, 5.8 tons per acre per year. They're slightly different, but they're in the same ballpark. Two different approaches giving you approximately or similar answers gives you some confidence that what we're doing is approaching reasonability, approaching being reasonable. Hey, following the acts that I've followed, it's tough. It's tough. Okay. So this is not going to work. In theory, we were going to show the time lapse of soil erosion accumulation during a given year. It ain't going to work. Okay, so the question becomes, we've shown that there is a variability in erosion year to year. But to design a practice, you need to understand when during the year soil erosion is likely to occur. Some parts of the world, you get rainfall for 1 or 2 months and it stops. That's when you have to worry. How about Iowa? If you could see this, you would see that we have erosion significantly occurring, accumulating throughout the growing season. Tells me something about the type of practices that we have to design. So with the same project, we can remove certain data layers and move in other information. One of the questions we've asked, if we were to place switchgrass on all hill slopes in the state of Iowa greater than 10%, what would our soil erosion rates be? If you reflect back on the previous set of slides where I had 4 states, was it uniform soil erosion across across the state every year? No, it wasn't. Where do we see concentrations of soil loss problems? Southwest Iowa is a biggie in the Luss Hill areas. Another one is in east central Iowa. So I've taken those 2 land management areas, Iowa major land management areas, taken their soil erosion rate for a selected time period, 13 tons per acre per year. That's the baseline. That's what we estimate with the current cropping systems and real-time weather. If we would have grown switchgrass on hill slopes only greater than 10%, that erosion rate would have been dropped to 3. East central Iowa started at 5.6, switchgrass on hill slopes greater than 10%, dropped to 1.9. The tolerable soil erosion loss rate for most soils is what? How many tons per acre per year? 5. We've gone from more than double in western Iowa, that tolerable rate, to less than that for the average across that MLRA, simply by growing a perennial on the most steeply sloping lands. Okay, we're going to pass this slide, obviously. You know what a dancer feels like when the band doesn't play? I don't think that's going to work either, but we'll try. Nope, it's not. Putting switchgrass on more slopes gives you less soil erosion, but the biggest impact is on that 10%. Biggest impact. Treat that area that is most problematic. Okay, so let's assume that we're not going to put perennial somewhere. What would happen if we put no-till, if we use no-till practices on all row crops? Kind of an academic looking slide. We've asked the question, we started sequentially, if we put no-till on the most erosive Huck 12, that's a watershed about the size of a township, what would the statewide soil erosion rate be? And then we go to 2 Huck 12s, 2 watersheds, 3, until we're all the way through, until the bottom right-hand part of that slide is our soil erosion rate statewide if no-till was implemented on all row crop fields in Iowa. Our estimated statewide soil erosion rate is about 1/10 of what we're currently estimating with a daily erosion project and NRI. 0.5 ton per acre per year, which is approximating our soil development rate. It can be done. We've heard from Dennis, we've heard stories from Mike and others about the increased rainfall that's occurring in spring. What's happened to the time of our planting dates the past 2-3 years? Rain has caused us to delay. So the question was asked, what happens to the soil erosion rate or potential as we delay planting? Should it increase, decrease, or not make a difference? Hadn't really thought about that. Well, we did. Someone asked that question. On the left-hand side, you see potential planting dates. At the top is May 30, sorry. At the lowest side is April 10. Across to the opposite side, you see the associated estimated soil erosion rates associated with those different planting dates. When I saw this, intuitively, it didn't make much sense to me. I grew up on a farm in northeast Iowa. It just didn't make a lot of sense. We looked at it a little more. Crop canopy cover does the same thing as residue, same thing as perennials. It intercepts that rainfall energy, which greatly reduces soil loss rates. When we plant early, that canopy develops early. And it protects that soil surface from the impact of those raindrops. Now, in addition to the canopy cover, we have to consider the impact of residues. Prior to tillage and planting, residue is basically our coverage, our protective mechanism for soils. So there's a time when we're soil vulnerable. That is between the time we disturb the residue and when canopy closure occurs. The later we plant, the later in the season does that vulnerable period exist. Okay, so what's the big deal about that? If you plot, these are the rainfall records from Iowa. That blue line gives us a running average, and the one we really want to look at. If you start in April, that line's relatively low, and that is the precipitation rate in terms of inches per hour. As the season progresses, our rainfall intensity increases. So when we open that vulnerable soil period between tillage and canopy cover, we're moving that vulnerable period into a time when our precipitation is creating greater problems. Timing does make a difference. So in closing, if we're going to address the kind of rainfall challenges that we see coming, that we're experiencing, we have to use a systems approach. We can't build a terrace big enough that's farmable to handle a 10 or 12-inch rain. The systems approach is going to be imperative. And I'll leave you with three thoughts, two of those from people much wiser than I. The top one is from a farmer in northeast Iowa, Tom Franz, and he always tells me, he says, Mother Nature bats last. Have a game plan that's sensitive to this reality. A colleague of mine worked at Iowa State, went to Wisconsin. He says, biology is limited by extremes, not by averages. Farmers manage biology. Failure to plan accordingly is a recipe for failure. From information we've seen time and time again and becoming more important, conserving soil will increasingly rely on spatial, across the landscape, within fields, and temporal, with time in the season, management tools to allow us to keep soil and water in place. Thank you much. Emily, it's up to you.